Let's call up our panel members here. So grab a seat, Jim, Christine, Michael, and Bill. And I'll introduce you, but while you're getting set up there, I do want to just say a couple of things. First of all, a huge thank you to all of you for being here. It's incredible to see the kind of support, as Jarvis said to start this morning. Last year with our sold-out Bertinsky events, we were really creating awareness for the organization. This year, we're really now getting into being able to share the actual work and the vision for what we're doing. And we will be back here. Maybe not here, maybe we need a bigger room next year, but to come back and talk about the results of the work that we're doing. This is going to be a long journey, but every minute of every week and every month counts. So it's going to be lots of fun to do that. The other thing I'd like to share, and it may be blindingly obvious, but we are sitting here today inside the Alpine Ski Club, a ski club. And many people have asked, so what can we do to help? And many of you have affiliations with our ski clubs. And as I sit here today, and as we listened to Kelly's talk this morning, we're going to hear a little bit more about OECMs. It's a long name, don't worry about it. But I've been thinking a lot, as has the board, of how we can involve our ski clubs to be part of the solution here without being too onerous in terms of their primary mandate. And it turns out we have one of the top people in the country, Kristen Ferguson, ex of Nature Conservancy of Canada, and now with the Ontario Conservation Accelerator here. The OC has been a fantastic supporter to the ECA, but we're really hoping, is Tim still here? Tim, are you still here? Put your hand up there. We had the GM of Georgian Peaks here earlier this morning. We really would love to see our ski clubs that, we're here because of the escarpment. And they can be part of the solution. And if there's something you can do, those of you that are affiliated with the club, please talk to your directors there. Say something to them. How can we be part of the solution? The OECM strategy is brilliant for this type of application. We want to convene something special for them. Jarvis is going to be in front of all of the GMs in the next few weeks, and we're going to take it from there. So just a little food for thought before we jump in. Okay, we have an amazing set of panelists. You guys are not going to be outdone by anybody earlier today here, because you got it going as well. I'm going to start down at the end with Michael Goodyear. Michael is the Director of Policy and Stakeholder Relations with the Trans-Canada Trail. Previous to that, he was with the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority. We'll talk a little bit about that work as well. If anybody knows a thing about trying to build a trail or two, I think it's Michael. He's probably been coast to coast. And anybody see 500 Days in the Wild recently? I don't know if that's good marketing for you guys or not.
It is, yeah.
That's a lot of days in the wild. Let me go to Jim Dobbin here. Jim, I will say, going back to the 1970s with some pioneering research that Jim did at Harvard, he has really led the globe in terms of strategic spatial development. We now have the good fortune of Jim moving to Collingwood here, and as opposed to retiring, helping organizations like the ECA and the UNESCO Geopark, aspiring Georgian Bay Geopark, get off the ground. And we are tapped into one of the foremost people when it comes to geospatial. How do you use all of this information here from a planning context? Jim's worked with on World Bank projects in I think 106 plus countries now. We're very fortunate to have him working in our area with us. Bill Lougheed here. What are we going to say about Bill? I could say a lot of things, because I know Bill personally. Our family, my wife Jill and her family, have donated land to the Georgian Bay Land Trust. And so we think very, very highly of this organization, have been sponsors since day one. The former chair of the board is sitting back over there. The current chair of the board is also a very good friend and a supporter of the ECA. Her family is. And when I talk to them, and here we're talking about nature today, I'm just going to say one thing. Bill is a force of nature. he has single-handedly, we'll get to that in a sec. Bill's going to be retiring in December. I put that in air quotes here because I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think the GBLT is going to let it happen. But Bill's just a tremendously talented individual. He's going to tell you about the remarkable accomplishments of the GBLT. And last but not least, we're so delighted to have Christine Drake, who is the manager of ecological corridors and heritage rivers for Parks Canada. And we have some other Parks Canada folks that Christine has brought along as well. For over 20 years, Christine's focused on species at risk and protected area conservation. All of that work led the federal government to appoint her as manager of their new national program for ecological corridors a couple years ago. We thought it might be rather fitting to have somebody like Christine on our panel today. So with that, let me jump in and get things started. And if we could just pull up the first slide here. So Christine, Parks Canada launched the National Program for Ecological Corridors in April of 2022. I think it was $60 million in funding that was put towards that. You're the one of the stewards of that money here. Can you briefly describe for the audience your mandate, where you are today?
For sure. Thanks, Bruce. Is that good? Can you hear me? Great. Well, part of the question also was why corridors, but I think Kelly's done an amazing job at setting the stage, so everyone knows the impetus of where this is coming from. The connectivity, ecological connectivity, has been of growing importance for several decades, but now is really starting to gain steam in policies and international documents, including the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which Canada is a signatory on. And one of the responses of the federal government for actioning that agreement was to create a national program for ecological corridors in Canada. What this is, it's a 5-year funded program, as Bruce mentioned, and we're charged with achieving it can be distilled down to 4 main objectives. They're up on the screen. The definition and setting criteria for ecological corridors was the first thing. We're done that. There's hard copies out on the tables outside of the room. I did not anticipate 260 people, however. So
share a copy,
there
please.
may not be enough for everyone, but luckily it's on our website. It's downloadable in PDF format. So I encourage you to go there. The second main objective of our program has been to map areas that are important for corridors. So not map corridors. There's a distinction there. And the idea there was that we knew as the federal government, we did not have the knowledge, the information, the data that needs to go into the fine scale thinking for where corridors are needed most. What we wanted to do was to take the best available information and provide visionary areas of where corridors would be most eminently helpful. So not to say corridors aren't necessary in other areas outside of these 23 areas, but they will have the quickest, biggest impact on helping us halt and reverse biodiversity loss, as well as helping species adapt to climate change using the best available knowledge we have right now for climate modeling, for threats, for where we know species are moving. So the map is also out on the table in front of you, in front of the room, and if I didn't have enough copies of those either, is also available for download from our website. Those 2 things are done. The third area of our program, as Bruce said, we were funded to the tune of $60 million. That goes quickly when you learn about all of the great work people are doing across the country. So we knew it would just scratch the surface. We knew it really is only going to be the start of what's needed by organizations like the ECA for creating corridor initiatives on the ground, but it was a big part of where we wanted to see the bulk of our funding contributed to from the program. So we have, we're in year 4 quarter of our 5-year program right now, and we have distributed or allocated the bulk of the funding now for corridor projects. And the fourth element of our program is it's around inspiring action. So we want, because we have such a small envelope, we want to magnify our impact. We want to make sure that we are getting the biggest bang for our buck and that we have longevity, so that there are tools and resources available and networks born and created that can continue on long beyond the 5 years of our program, and that will help harness more work beyond what we can do as a small team of 7, by the way. That's how many there are of us. And then laced and woven throughout all of these big objectives is the importance, we layered on the importance of involving, engaging, and incorporating Indigenous worldview and Indigenous knowledge and leadership in the stewardship of ecological corridors. So I'll stop there, but I will talk about that more, that end piece, at the next question.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Fascinating stuff. Bill, I'm going to move over to yourself. Can you give us a sense of your big vision for an ecological corridor along Eastern Georgian Bay, and maybe a little bit what sparked the vision for you?
Well, we've all heard today about Blanding's turtles' travels and how moose can travel. Well, Pluie, the gray wolf, was my inspiration, and some of you in the audience will know about Pluie. Pluie was a collared female gray wolf, left southern Alberta in the middle of winter and traveled through Montana, through the western United States, covered 100,000 square miles before her return in 1993 to the Kootenays, where she was shot. Unfortunately, legally shot, but shot. That story is the story that inspired the Y2Y, the Yellowstone to Yukon project. And in 2015, I heard that story at an ILCN meeting in Indianapolis, where I was attending a workshop on large landscape corridors and creating them. And that's really where I met people with the passion to create these big corridors, and that got me thinking about Eastern Georgian Bay. And I don't know what, maybe you can put that slide up.
I'm going to have to flip through. Yeah, there we go. Great.
Yeah, that looks like it.
Yeah,
so
that one.
I think, are there dark green areas on that and lighter green areas? The lighter green areas are existing protected areas, and the dark green areas are a vision for completing a 120-kilometer corridor. There's another 50 kilometers to the north heading towards Killarney that will be a second phase of the project. And so that's our vision of what is already a corridor. I want to back up a little bit. This area, North Port Severn, on this shore west of the Trans-Canada, is mostly unfragmented. It already is a corridor. So and those types of the corridors are the ones we like, because we don't have to do as much work to restore them, and they already have natural migratory network in place. So we don't have to do much with it. We just need to look after what Mother Nature already gave us.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Bill. We'll come back to where you are now in a few minutes. Jim, do you want to pass that on to Michael here? Okay, you got one down there. Michael, why don't you give us an overview of the vision for the Trans-Canada Trail? Where is it today?
Sure thing. So the Trans-Canada Trail actually started in 1992. It was two individuals, Bill Pratt and Pierre Camus, so two individuals, one from Alberta, one from Quebec. And they were working on Canada 125, so 125 years of Confederation within Canada. And as they were planning the celebrations and working towards that goal, those two individuals thought, wouldn't it be great, as a means to connecting the country, to really utilize the nature and the attraction that we have across this country, and the interest in outdoor recreation as a means to really bring the country together. So that's when it was originally created in '92, and then we started working towards that vision through various kind of efforts. We are a charity at our core, so we were doing a lot of campaigning. We received a lot of federal support, bipartisan support, I should say, and we were working towards the objective of connection. And thankfully and gratefully, we were able to achieve that connection. So in 2017, we were able to acknowledge that there is a connected recreational route across Canada. It is now 29,000 kilometers in length.
Wow.
It is, I guess, connected through all types of recreational trail methods. So there's paddling, there's cycling, there's hiking. It's not one single pathway that you can go, but it's a multiple kind of set of experiences. And I would describe I guess the trail itself is really a trail of trails. It's not about a connection. You know, you talked about 500 Days in the Wild. Yes, people are now starting to kind of add that to their bucket list of accomplishments. But it's not about a single experience. It's about crossing the country. It's about getting to know the nature or the natural environments that exist in different areas, the communities, and even the methods of exploring, right? With water routes in Northern Ontario, in the Yukon as well. These are ways that traditionally have been used for transportation for Indigenous communities, early settlers, as well as just recreational means as well. So it's really kind of evolved as an organization. We did get to connection in 2017, and that was a huge accomplishment, but we will never be complete. We kind of use that. You know, one lesson I would say as a foundation or a charitable organization, you're never done. There's always something else. But we evolved as an organization to really not just be a funder of recreational trail and the Trans-Canada Trail. We wanted to make sure that the trail was not only connected, but we wanted to increase the utility of the trail, you know, making sure it's more accessible for all people of, I guess, different cultures, new Canadians. We wanted to expand it into new areas, which it originally was not. We're improving the accessibility of it. And a big shift is we also moved into trying to be the national sector for trail support. We're the only national organization that has the reach across the country with the staff capacity to really communicate with all of these groups. So most of our funding programs are only can only be utilized or only eligible for sections of Trans-Canada Trail, but we feel that there's still a need to support the entire trail sector across the country. There's a need, there's a value, et cetera. So we've evolved to being more than just a funding organization, to be that trail sector. We're developing everything from, I guess, economic studies to rationalize the benefit of recreational trails for economic standpoints, health benefits, you know, advocating for the benefits associated with recreational trail and mental health. A whole bunch of different resources. I encourage you to take a look at our website, but it's really been the evolution of our organization to be more than just about the trail. That's kind of our core business, but we want to make sure that we're supporting all of Canada, all of the users that exist across there. And a big shift, and this is kind of a program that I will mention, this is something that can be eligible anywhere, is we are looking at youth employment. There's certainly a priority towards Indigenous and children at risk, but any organization that has a need or an opportunity to do trail work and kind of instill the experience of one generation into the next, we are providing funding for that as well. So I've been there for just 11 years now. And so we achieved connection in that time, but we've really evolved into being an organization that we feel, you know, really kind of captures the enthusiasm of recreational trail within Canada and really tries to support it as well.
Great.
So.
Thanks, Michael. And you know, if we could see, if it was a little clearer, we might see across the bay, you know, towards Tiny and where the trail is. It's not that far away, but to know that the organization's there to support, and we see, you know, the next iteration. Jarvis talked about, you know, the private landowner piece, and later on, as the corridor is built, obviously the recreational component is going to be very important, and how that dovetails into the regional economy. And we're going to see some of that in the conservation report and Martin Ridlow's panel. So fantastic to have you here with us on that. Jim, I want to turn to you. You've worked on corridor projects and country scale projects all around the world. We'll come to some of your mapping and so on in a minute, but I just want to know to begin with, when you came back here, what captured your imagination about the work that we're doing at the ECA GTA across southern Georgian Bay. And did you have any, as you started looking at it, any early hypotheses that you thought might be, worth considering?
Sure. Thank you, Bruce, and good afternoon. When I moved to Collingwood 2.5 years ago, I got out of the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm very happy to be here compared to that.
Jim, get your mic up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. But I became quickly aware of the of top scientists in the region, like the Nature Conservancy Canada, saying that this area is probably the most high-valued conservation lands at scale in close proximity to the GTA. So that was kind of the first insight as I came here, because I only came here as a high school kid skiing, and I only saw Collingwood in the winter. So it was fun to be here at this time of year and to see this. But this area is unique, it's magnificent, and it's clearly exceptional in terms of biodiversity assets and ecosystem services. Three things kind of popped out when I moved here. One, that a lot of the natural heritage, like ANSIs, areas of natural scientific interest, were not protected. They're scattered all over the landscape, and they're not connected. I noticed that the wetlands above and below the escarpment were not well protected. They weren't even well documented. And they're essential for biodiversity conservation and water flows. I think that Collapore forests lie outside the Green Belt, Ontario Green Belt, and the Biosphere Reserve. These are major and important areas. So I just noticed that there were a lot of elements that weren't part of this ecological corridor. And two, I realized that much of the mapping was really out of date. It was derived from satellite imagery, a lot of it 30-meter resolution, which isn't that good for corridor planning. And we haven't taken advantage of some of the new technologies like satellite imagery, LiDAR, Sentinel-2 imagery, high-resolution imagery. But this kind of information is really critical to doing corridor planning. And I think that some of the designations of wetlands were misrepresenting wetlands. They were over-exaggerating the size of wetlands and calling wetlands that were actually forests. So this is just basic, fundamental, baseline information that needs to be corrected. And I think the third thing was kind of the importance and significance of two major ecosystems or environments. One, the limestone karst landscape, the Niagara Escarpment, and the riparian corridors, the waters, the springs, the streams, the cold water fisheries, all across this region. And it was, I think the biggest insight was seeing that we had two major kind of sets of corridors or networks. And where they cross are probably real hotspots. So as we start to look at this data and start to review it, this is probably where some of the greatest places will be.
Great. Okay, we'll come back in more detail, Jim. Christine, we talked about 30 by 30 earlier today. What kind of impact does the federal government and your group think that corridors can have in Canada on the 30 by 30 targets? And
Great question, Bruce. Thank you. So Kelly talked about this in her presentation. So just to recall, there's a quantitative aspect to the Target 3 in the coming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and there's a qualitative. Corridors really speak to the qualitative aspect. They're about the well-connected. So corridors aren't necessarily going to contribute at all to the quantitative aspect. So it's not expected that a corridor will be a protected area. There's a distinction. a protected area for the purpose of 30 by 30 needs to be conserving biodiversity. A corridor, rather, needs to conserve connectivity. There's a difference, there's a distinction. So the bar for preserving biodiversity, it's much higher. Connectivity is about saving space for animals to move through, to get to those places where they need to do their vital life functions. If part of your corridor includes areas that are for vital life functions, you should be striving for a protected area in those spaces, not a corridor. So it could be that you have within a visionary area, you could have multiple protected areas and corridors linking those protected areas.
So it's a mosaic approach.
It's a mosaic
that
approach.
We've been talking a lot about, and we do have a lot of protected areas. In fact, I know the provincial government is now talking about some expansion of provincial parks in the area, which has been exciting here. But to your point, not all of this will end up being protected as in a legislated protection.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's a really important distinction. I think as we start talking with our municipalities in greater detail about this, this conversation has big implications as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that we're going to have to work and collaborate together to make this happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Christine. Bill, I want to come back to the Eastern Georgian Bay and some of your successes there in your corridor development, your accomplishments, and how you've done it, and what's next. So if we could get up Bill's, which of the two do you
Yeah,
want? Bill?
I can talk to that last one you had up.
Yeah.
So a concept of protecting larger spaces came to my mind in 2016 using road allowances. These are concession road allowances shown in red and green there. The red ones, I believe, are patented. Green ones are unpatented. They're now all patented lands. So I went and talked to the township, some councillors I knew, and I said, what do you think about putting a conservation easement on these lands? I approached it that way because I thought we want the township as a partner. We don't want to assume these lands, then we're standing alone against any expropriation by the province. So we created this lattice of protected areas after consulting with First Nations and getting their buy-in and their letters of support, after talking to constituents, and after actually having talked to two major areas that we conserved by conservation easement, one to the north, 5,000 acre property, and one to the south, about 1,500 acres. And our plan was to connect these by using this new conservation tool, or I haven't heard it being used anywhere else in the world, but maybe it has been used. Next slide, please. So shown in dark green now is the area that is protected. The lighter green are Land Trust's existing protected areas, and that is now protected corridor in the south part of Georgian Bay. It's 32,900 acres. We got funding from ECCC through the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, and funding through the provincial government of Ontario, Greenlands Fund, and through OLTA. Also, we had an Ontario Petroleum grant. So with the province buy-in, big time. We had MECP actually giving verbal support to it because they are basically the landowner of the crown lands involved inside these road allowances. And so that's sort of where we're at and where we're going, as you saw in that. Maybe you can flip to that first slide you had up before.
Yeah.
That's our vision going forward, 120 kilometer long corridor. It will turn left, maybe 5 years from now and go all the way to the top of Georgian Bay, hopefully. But we're well on our way to protecting that most northerly section you see there. And we're in consultation with the First Nations and It's all the partners. It's, as we've heard earlier today, you need all partners to buy into this. One thing I forgot to mention is that the conservation easement on those lands reinstates indigenous hunting and fishing rights on those municipal lands, because according to the Robinson Treaty, that as I read it, the language is pretty clear that when a municipality or corporation owns ceded lands, then those hunting and fishing rights go away. So this reinstated those rights, and also the other point of this whole corridor project, in my mind, is getting people back out in the land, so it's free access to everyone on these protected areas.
Yeah, Jim, yeah. Bill, really well done. I think it highlights a number of things that we've been talking about all day, and perhaps none more than, Kelly, what you talked about. These are all very situational corridors, or situational in how they arise. You have been incredibly perceptive in identifying the opportunity with these road allowances and doing something with it. So well done as a neighboring community here. It's fantastic to see. So, Michael, I'm going to come back to you. In a previous life, before being with TransCanada Trails, you were with the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, and I know you did a lot of work on the East Duffins headwaters while you were there. And I gather from our conversation, kind of like here, biodiversity hotspot, recreational hotspot, and today it's become a great protected area story. You want to walk us through sort of how you had to finesse those two things, because we have those competing interests in this area here.
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. Thank you. So in that role, I was the land manager, and we were looking at, I guess, kind of actively taking over or re-engaging management of a property that had been dormant and pretty much left alone without active management for a long time. So we were coming into an environment where there was rogue trail building, there was a lot of recreational activities taking place, but not in a restricted or directed way. It was just kind of free for all. So we went in there as the Toronto Conservation Authority. We have the mandate of conservation. It's not about recreation first, it's conservation first. So we had, I guess, that as the strongest backing for us. We knew what we had to do. Some of the lands were donated from previous landowners, and they had expectations of how the land would be used. We had lands with the Ontario Heritage Trust, and again, we had some understanding, but conservation was the primary focus. So we knew that that was the direction. It was not about to be swayed by any other kind of vision or intention. The first thing we started to do was try to develop communications. We wanted to make sure that of the user groups that were there, we had a way of getting, I guess, messaging from our organization into the network. We couldn't meet with the hundreds of bikers. We couldn't meet with the hundreds of hikers and equestrian riders, sorry. But we could have, I guess, steering committees where we could kind of meet at the, kind of in a more concentrated method. And what we tried to do, the first position was to rationalize what it is our mandate was and why we needed to protect it. So we went back to biology and conservation classes, why, talking about why biodiversity was important. Why did we procure these lands from a water conservation and water protection standpoint? Really educating these user groups so that they understood that this wasn't just a forest that hasn't been developed. There's an actual ecological value to these lands, and that was their primary purpose. Now, at the same time, though, there was recreational use. So when we did some of these terrestrial and aquatic surveys, we identified that even with these recreational uses, there was still a rich biodiversity within the property. So the user groups were coming back to us and saying, well, there has to be a balance. There has to be something that, recreation can exist because these species are still here. The migratory birds are still using it, or the ground nesting birds still reside here. We haven't kicked everybody out, and it's not a monoculture of dog strangling vine, for example. So we had to do some thinking. We had to really, look at what was best, and we did some research on trail density. We did all kinds of investigation about, what are the associated impacts with the public use, but really kind of taking a back seat to the ecological and conservation based. So once we kind of had that information as the Conservation Authority, then we began the public campaign of communication. And we worked with those kind of pointed individuals who were kind of leads of the sector group, but then started to do everything from workshops to, night hikes to newsletters to the locals out there, and we started to communicate why some of these changes were taking place. Some of these rogue trails were in areas that they shouldn't have been. They were in areas where, sensitive species did exist, and yes, there was that balance, but we felt it could be stronger. So we said we're going to close these areas, but then in contrast to that, we realized that there was areas that had been heavily impacted from public use or even management activities such as logging in the past. We said these pine plantations, which have a lower biodiversity, these are sufficient for you guys for your recreational needs, and we were able to come up with that balance between the two. So it was really validating the mandate through education, but then also trying to work with them to find a solution, because it isn't just a hard no or there won't be future cooperation.
Great. That's some great learnings for us, Michael, and I think it's a path that we are following, the science first, the conservation first, but this is a recreational capital here, and we do want to find ways to be able to strike that balance. It is so important as well. So, okay, Jim, you've been the guy that's been doing so much of our work in terms of the mapping. I want to throw up the, keep going here, one more, there we go. Okay, so Jim, you've been one of a team of our scientific advisors. We've got some amazing biologists, field ecologists working with us, project managers, just a great team, but you're kind of quarterbacking a lot of this here. So let's start with this map. Walk us through the geographical area that we're talking about and bring us up to speed.
Sure, thanks, Bruce. First of all, the boundaries, the red boundary is defined by watersheds. So we have a natural boundary. It includes 5 watersheds. In 2023, the Ontario Minister of Natural Resources completely changed the watersheds of Ontario and gave them all names. So you'll know these, the Big Head River near Meaford, the Beaver River Outlet, Eugenie Lake and the Beaver River, Mad River, and the Southern Georgian Bay shoreline are the watersheds that contains. The project area, as Jarvis mentioned, is 185,000 hectares. The area of the Ontario Greenbelt and the Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Network is, that's the black boundary, they coincide, by the way, is 55,000 hectares. The region extends from west of Meaford, goes east to diminishing wetlands, south to Creemore, and south of Feversham and Kimberley, and then all the way up to Georgian Bay. So this area includes 2 counties, Simcoe County and Grey County, and 2 conservation authorities, the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority and the Grey Sauble. And there's 8 municipalities within the project, like Collingwood, the Blue Mountains. The Bruce Trail is shown in yellow. The ANSIs are shown in purple. These are the scattered areas of important scientific interest. And the wetlands are shown in blue. And you can see, while we're focused on the escarpment and the river riparian corridors, we needed to have the whole watershed so we have context. We know what's happening upstream and throughout the basins. From the beginning, of course, water is so important, and you can see from this map that many of the rivers either cross the escarpment or come out of the escarpment. So it's really, these 2, as I said before, these 2 main features, the riparian corridors and the escarpment. And of course, it's a karst limestone landscape, which is a really unique natural feature with high and unique biodiversity. You can notice the gaps, like the wetlands and ANSIs around the Collapore forest. And when you look at all of Georgian Bay, like all around Georgian Bay, you can see a great contrast in the north and the east and the west. There's so many more large protected areas. Where we are, there's a few small protected areas, and they're very scattered. So we have a big opportunity here to do some big things with corridors and parks and protected areas.
Do you want to walk us through the model, Jim, that you had, maybe the next slides or more?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just sort of,
So I can't see that, but looking from your left to right, this is the process that we're undertaking, and it's 8 steps. Now, we're combining our corridor planning team. We have 3 of us as planners on the team. We have 2 great ecologists, biologists. I think Corey Stinson is here. I don't think Mark Heaton is here. Just a great team, and we have Jose Rafael, who's an expert, and I've known him for many, many years, who's expert in satellite image interpretation. So we really have a great team to analyze satellite imagery, do groundwork, and identify environmentally and ecologically significant areas, and link those to species at risk, identify key habitats, water sources, and from there we analyze the data using a GIS spatial model. We'll develop a model to run various scenarios of potential corridors, like the one I was suggesting, crossing taking the 2 different types of environments and seeing where those hotspots are. And then we'll sit down with regional stakeholders and right holders and score and work together in looking at these scenarios and developing a direction. And then we'll start to, once we have an optimal corridor, we'll start to look at land ownership and what lands are not protected and which land should be. So that's the overall strategy, and there's 2 phases to the current work. Right now we're in the compilation of data, working with the science and the satellite imagery and all the data sources, and we're creating new data because, as I mentioned earlier, the existing databases, the existing maps are not adequate. So instead of using 30-meter resolution on wetlands and forests, we're down to 10-meter resolution, and instead of having say 8 classes of land use and land cover as is from kind of the Ontario GeoHub, we're using 10-meter resolution multispectral imagery and have about 27 classes of land use, land cover. That means we can have, instead of 2 types of wetlands, we may have 4 or 5 types of wetlands. And they're all very different, and gives us a better base across the region. So that's basically
Great.
what we're doing here. And we have we're working on a detailed, I think the next slide shows, no, that's not mine.
yeah. Just maybe the last slide here, Jeff. I don't want to.
There's-
one more going the other way. Yeah. That's your last one there.
Oh, that's my last slide. Okay. Well, we have a slide where we have a very detailed model in development, which I can share with you anytime after the presentation. But this slide is really interesting because the kind of the ochre color represents the Ontario Greenbelt and the Biosphere Network. And you can see, so that's following the escarpment. And then you can see more clearly the riparian corridors crossing and running through that area. And if you look closely, Castle Glen is one of those areas where is a real hotspot for biodiversity, because we all know that what our ecologists tell us that so much biodiversity is found along the river corridors. But then you add that to the karst landscape, you've got a real hotspot. So Castle Glen is there, I can't point to it, and Telsman is right there as well.
Similar as well.
It's pretty interesting.
Good.
This is
Jim.
preliminary, but this is kind of the
Jim,
hunch
thanks,
we had.
thanks very much. I want to save a little bit of time for questions here, but I'm just going to ask you a couple very quick questions. Funding opportunities. We learned this morning it's not free. It's not necessarily cheap, although the cost to fix environmental problems is much, much higher. And I think that might have been what Jarvis was trying to say, is that just protecting what we've got is a lot less expensive than doing it the first way. But let's just talk very quickly, some ideas on where the ECA gets funding. Christine.
Well, we are hopeful the Ecological Corridors program will continue. So right now, as I mentioned, our funding envelope is pretty well spoken for. However, we're hoping for a phase 2, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, there's lots of opportunities to apply for funding in Environment and Climate Change Canada. Either currently or very shortly, we'll have a call for proposals through the Nature Climate Solutions Fund. That involves demonstrating is that me? Carbon sequestration is a key goal and objective of your area and what will be achieved. There's also programs like 2 Billion Trees that's funded through Natural Resources Canada. They have $3.19 billion over 10 years. And there are other programs like the Agriculture Climate Solutions Fund that's managed by Agriculture Canada that work closely with farmers and a key group to involve in a mosaic
Very important in this
landscape.
area too.
Yeah.
It's interesting as we learn that it doesn't have to, corridors don't have to be protected areas. Your corridor, there's other departments than yours that focus on OECMs, for example, and other things. So some really good learning for us. Bill, you're the master at securing funds.
Well, I can tell you what we've used. And the Canada's Nature Fund Quick Start program was a great program, but fortunately now it's gone the way of the woolly mammoth. But there are many other federal programs that the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, we have a grant under that. The NHCP program, Natural Heritage Conservation Program for private lands, is a really good program. It's run by Wildlife Habitat Canada. There is Eco Action program from Environment Canada. What else? Those are the, well, no, actually, I mean, there's the Challenge Fund that we are still utilizing under we have a Community Nominated Priority Places grant, and that's maybe something you could get them interested in maybe redoing for here. And there's one other, I'm blanking on that. And the Indigenous, the IPCA program that we've helped out First Nations. We helped Chequamegon First Nation create their IPCA. We were supporting
IPCA, Bill, just
advisor.
So people know an IPCA is?
Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area. And so that's a great program. And it's continuing on. And there's some other Challenge Fund programs I gather they're still going on in the background, not so well known. There's the Ontario Trillium Foundation. We got a GROW grant for growing our protected areas under their Green Peoples program. There's the Ontario Greenlands Fund. And then there are those family foundations that have been in the conservation world for quite a while. I'd also point you to those foundations that supported Y2Y and A2A. These are, and some of them are American, and these are foundations that look at big landscapes in a very favorable way, and those wealthy private donors, which we all love.
Yeah. I'm wondering, those are some amazing resources. I know we're quite a little short. Where's Jarvis, or how are we on time here? Do we 10 minutes or so. Let me just ask one question quickly. We've talked a lot today about the complexity of multi-jurisdictional corridors, just by definition, have that complexity layered on them here. Getting the political engagement and the other agency stakeholder engagement, any words of wisdom for us? Anybody, go ahead.
Yeah.
Michael, you've had to do a lot of this.
Yeah, definitely. So I think when you're dealing with, I guess, multiple jurisdictions, whether it's municipal or provincial, whatever level, my two recommendations is find commonality with them. So whether it's a plan of active transportation, whether it's a tourism strategy, there's a lot of allies out there. You just need to find the documentation in which your vision can ally with.
Yep.
But then there's also the ones that are not a part of it, right? And I think for those ones, what we found is successful is just be persistent, right? They may not have the mandate right now, but come back to them afterwards, right? Come back with successes, come back with new examples, new tools, whittle away at them a little bit, right? Because, my trail, the vision that you guys have, these are not, weekly or quarterly objectives. These are generational objectives. So I think you have to be really consistent. But what we have also found out, in various spots across the country is where there is a non-governmental organization that can champion something, like a vision for an area, those are the organizations that sprawl across political jurisdictions. Those rigid lines of, I can't deal with anything outside of my jurisdiction or my funding stops here. If you can work with an association or an association can champion that vision, that's been very successful because they can get in on those different topics and priorities of different mandates and different plans. And then really it changes the narrative because it no longer says, well, it's done out there, we can't do that in this town, it's not my responsibility. It changes the narrative, and by having that champion, it really kind of rallies in together an entirely new, I guess, network of organizations as well. So that's been very successful. New Brunswick, there's an organization called the Fundy Guild. It's everyone from BIAs to conservation organizations to people who do rafting on the Fundy tides as well. And they want to see extra development. They want to see more visitation. They want to see more roads, houses, etc. But rather than them just trying to advocate for an airport or a casino or something large that, are the typical traditional, like put this here and then everyone will come around it. They're just starting from the bottom up. They're getting everybody, the community support, and they're the allies that are going, I guess, kind of door to door and really kind of
One of the meta messages of today is community up, right?
May I add to that
And Bill,
question?
just both of you, just very quickly, and we're going to go to questions. Yep.
Bill first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Too much.
I just want to say that, one of the key things for any corridor initiative is Indigenous engagement early, and empowering Indigenous communities to play a lead role in your corridor initiative. And I've heard from you, Bruce, and Jarvis, that that's happening here. So congratulations. It is so important. One of the things, I'll be quick. Yeah. One of the things we learned when we started our program, we thought, okay, we'll start with the IUCN definition of an ecological corridor. Why reinvent the wheel? Let's use this, Canada. We heard from our Indigenous partners, the people we talked to from Indigenous people, Indigenous communities and organizations. This definition does not resonate with us. It is very Western. So please, instead of using the IUCN definition of corridors, use for what's made in Canada. It includes Indigenous worldview. So it doesn't leave them out. It makes sure they're front and foremost in your corridor initiative.
Thank you.
So very quickly, this past Monday, we had all First Nations on our coast, all of the planners from all the townships, some of the councillors, a lot of other conservation groups, experts from universities, all in one room discussing our new natural area conservation plan. And those are going to be 2-year, 3-year discussions to try and get our mapping agreed upon, and that will include First Nations mapping, which will be private, but this is a collective talking about the land and land uses, everyone in one room.
Great. Thank you. Panelists, thank you very much. Let's open it up to the floor. Got lots of questions. Bill, we're going to start with you here, and then we'll go back there, and there's a question over here. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Is there any universal agreement, domestically or internationally, on what should be the permitted human uses or impact of humans on lands in an ecological corridor?
Go ahead.
Can I start?
Yes.
Well, no. And the answer is that because it is very dependent on what the goals of the corridor are. You can have different goals for different corridors. You can connect species, you can connect biodiversity, you can connect culture. Different land use would be acceptable in different scenarios, depending what the goal of your corridor is.
Great. Okay. Sorry, we've got a few people that haven't asked a question yet, so I'd like to just go to a few people who haven't to start with. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick one. In terms of your experience or advice on things that are putting pressure on as this takes time and et cetera, I'm thinking of gravel pits or when overnight 800 trees at Ontario Place get cut down, or things that you wouldn't want to see, especially in this area, let's say the expansion of gravel pits and the pressures. What advice would you give to this huge coalition of people working on this to try to not lose those kinds of things while this process is happening? What would you suggest as strategies?
Sure. Go ahead. Sweet.
What, in a word, resilience. Just like building up our ecosystems, we have to also be resilient ourselves, I think, in continuing to fight for what we believe in.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left here. You had your hand up, yes?
One of the most significant contributions that I found was applying for my environmental farm plan through the agricultural associations, Ontario Soil and Crop Association. This allowed me to re-establish my wetlands, for which we got the North American Native Plant Society's award, and also allowed me to restore various buffer zones around my farm. I was wondering, what are you doing to reach the farmers to incorporate them within, or how can we incorporate the farmers into these kinds of action plans that you're putting together?
I'll just answer very quickly. I think you heard Jarvis mention the agricultural community a couple times today. Obviously, we can't be everywhere all at once. We're a young organization, but we view the agricultural community as being incredibly important partners, and those dialogues are already beginning right now. There's farmland trusts, there's programs like you're talking about that we think there's every opportunity for cooperation, and we view agricultural lands as absolutely central to this region. So, one last question. Okay. Okay.
Hi. Andrew. Stay right here. It's the speaker.
Yeah. Why don't we...
Andrew McCammon with the Ontario Headwaters Institute. It's more of a comment than a question, but I just really want to congratulate particularly Jim Dobbin. This entity seems to be taking an approach that integrates water with the land. There are other areas, the Green does a really bad job at protecting water, and the approach to protect both the riparian corridors and the incredibly important ground infiltration through the karst limestone, it's front and center, it's right there, and I really appreciate it, and great job. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can't tell you how vital we see water being in the whole strategy here. I don't think anybody can pretend to understand our karst topography very well and the impacts that development might have on it. The fact that the original Castle Glen application has a gas station right on the brow of the escarpment on top of karst topography is an example of how little we know. So, okay, with that, we need to come to a close. I'd ask you, please, put your hands together for our amazing panelists here. You can keep asking them questions during coffee break. And I don't know if we're able to flip up the app here or not, but again, those that have downloaded it, we really would like to be able to try and get your feedback here from the sessions. So when this gets flashed up here, just hold your phone up, it'll open up the link, and we'll go from there. Jarvis?
One more time for Bruce and friends. That was amazing.